Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Welcome to the Dr. Joseph Warren Historical Society interview series with prominent authors and historians specializing in the colonial period and revolutionary America. My name is Christian Despina, and today it's my pleasure to be joined by my colleague, Katie Turner Getty, a writer, speaker, and researcher of early American history, as well as a frequent contributor to the Journal of the American Revolution.
Thank you so much, Christian. I wore my kind of Revolutionary War jacket tonight to kind of get into the spirit, thank you, of tonight's talk. I am very pleased to welcome our guest tonight, Nikki Stewart, who is the Executive Director of the Old North Church and Historic Site. She previously served as the Vice President of Development at United South End Settlements, where she led the organization's fundraising and communications efforts, which received numerous awards, including recognition for advancing racial equity in the city of Boston. Nikki also serves as the board chair for Zoomix, an East Boston-based youth arts organization that empowers young people to build successful futures for themselves through music, technology, and creative employment. She received a Juris Doctor and bachelor's degree from Northeastern University and is a graduate of the course in exponential fundraising at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, as well as the Institute for Nonprofit Practice. Nikki is the co-founder and sometimes host of the Hub History podcast about Boston history. Nikki, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Nikki, this is the first hosting I've done with Katie, so it's going to be a battle of the Boston accents and the New York City accents, so you're going to have to bear with us.
That's right.
I wanted to have that like neutral Pennsylvania accent, so I'll just even it out.
Balance it off. Excellent.
Well, let me start by asking you this. So I know that you bring a long nonprofit background, a strong sense of community, and you've worked with diverse groups of both adults and children. So how do you think this experience and this networking will help you to lead Old North into its next phase of development?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the organizations that I've worked with previously have all been, though they've had different missions, have all been really neighborhood focused, rooted in different communities around the city. And so I do think I bring a strong sense of just like collaboration and community spirit to the role. And I think what's interesting about Old North is that we welcome visitors, truly from all over the world, students from across the country, but yet we are rooted, almost literally in the center of the North End community. And the church has been a part of this community for almost 300 years. And so, I'm hoping to help the organization really explore what we mean to our neighbors and the role that we may fill locally, which is a little different than what we offer people who are traveling here.
Right.
It's amazing to think of Old North really being part of the North End community for 300 years. We know that the North End is a very lively, vibrant community. It is exceptionally historic. Nikki, could you talk a little bit about maybe what people can expect when they come to visit Old North? And also, and this is kind of a fun question, do you think that the scene in the movie National Treasure with Nick Cage has somehow drawn more visitors to Old North?
So I saw American Treasure recently for the first time. My husband felt that it was just my duty as the executive director of this organization to watch it. I will admit that I fell asleep, and so we had to then have a second viewing. So I have seen it now. And I do think it sparks interest in the site. I think we are fortunate to have really, an iconic place that people either remember from elementary school or they've seen National Treasure, or they just remember the Longfellow poem, Paul Revere's Ride, etc. So there are a lot of things that bring people here. To your question of what people can expect. So, we've been doing a lot of thinking about what our tourism operations might look like this year, which obviously is very different than what it would have been pre-pandemic, but we are really hopeful and really eager to reopen the site. I'm on campus today and it's so strange to see it empty. But we believe that we'll have really a self-guided experience this summer. We hope to open in the late spring, bring people through the church with info sheets, having an educator on hand to, offer remarks and answer questions, a pretty distanced and limited model. But we just think it's important to be there. And I know for people who are traveling to Boston and hoping to do the Freedom Trail, there's a lot of excitement around our site and, a lot of disappointment this year when we couldn't be open. So we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, and
Me
you just alluded to the Longfellow poem. So this brings me to my question. So April 18th, 1775, the phrase "one if by land, two if by sea" has become such an iconic moment in pre-revolutionary Boston, obviously made all the more famous by the Longfellow poem. But what I find fascinating is that so many of these big moments happen within such a close proximity in Boston along what is now the Freedom Trail. It's amazing when you're actually physically there and you can just, these sites are really within a close radius of each other. The Boston Massacre site, Paul Revere's house, Old North, so many of the Old South Meeting House, King's Chapel, St. Paul's, the old Granary Burial Ground, St. Paul's Chapel. But what I wanted to ask you is really, do you think that it's more of a challenge jostling for visitor support with so many other nearby historic sites, or do you think that Old North benefits from such close proximity?
I think we definitely benefit from the close proximity. It's like the auto mile, right? Like that's where you come for your history. And the sites are so complementary. I think we absolutely benefit. The experience goes well together. We have both the Freedom Trail, we have Boston National Historical Park. So, there's a lot of partnership, there's a lot going on. And, because Boston is so walkable and things are so close, you really can do everything. Maybe it's a full one day, but if you're here for the weekend, I don't think we really have to compete because I want visitors to go to those other sites and
Right.
to get the full experience.
Right.
Absolutely. Talk to us about some of your plans. There are some really big anniversaries approaching. There is the 300th anniversary of the church's founding coming up in 2023, and the 250th anniversary of the famous lantern hangings that Christian was just talking about in the steeple of Old North in 2025. Maybe if you have anything set or hoping to plan anything, if you could fill us in a little bit on those exciting events. And also, can you tell us a bit about your current strategic planning process, which we understand might involve the unveiling of a new mission statement?
Yeah, so we're thinking a lot about the anniversaries that are coming up and, really looking at what we believe our relevance is today and into the future. It's amazing to be at an organization and at a site that's almost 300 years old. But I think we become complacent if we think that that's what our meaning is from. And, we believe that civic engagement is really the thread that ties the founding of the church and, the role that the church played in the early colonies, in the communities, to the American Revolution, the lantern hanging, the events that we all know, moving forward to the way Longfellow leveraged Paul Revere's story and the steeple of Old North leading up to the Civil War to today. So I think there's a natural arc there. And I think we can all agree that, informed and active citizenship is more important than ever. And so we're looking at how to build out an interpretive and educational experience here that is centered on the lantern signal, but is bigger than just, that one night in 300 years. And also looking at how to have really a more diverse set of stories and voices that are part of our history. If folks have visited us in recent years, many may have stopped by our historic chocolate program. That's been a really popular and interesting bit of history that we've been able to offer. But we've also had to wrestle with, the connections between the chocolate trade, the trade of enslaved Africans, the early congregants, the philanthropy that built the church. It's very complex. All of that ties together. So there are a lot of stories that we can tell, and we're really taking advantage of the time that we're closed right now to go through a strategic planning process, to really articulate what our themes are, what we want, the takeaways for visitors to be, and being able to launch that in advance of the anniversaries is really important to us. Because you asked what our hopes are for the anniversaries, we're definitely thinking about, what those celebrations will look like. They're big milestones for us. And Stacey Abrams, if you're out there, we want you to be our speaker. So please be in touch.
Well, we'll see what we could do to try and make that happen. That would be incredible. But this kind of leads me into my next question as well. And you've touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about the steps taken to reconcile Old North's interpretation with the knowledge of Captain Jackson's direct connection to the trade of enslaved Africans?
Yeah. So this is work that began before my arrival with the organization. I'm pretty new here, so I started in June of 2020. And in 2019, through research by Dr. Jared Hardesty, the organization and the staff became aware of just really direct ties that Captain Jackson had to the slave trade. And actually, at the time of his death, he was on board a ship that had several enslaved children listed as cargo. So it was, a painful discovery, but certainly an important discovery, and we're glad that it was made. And so the organization, took some immediate actions to take Captain Jackson's name off of the building that houses the chocolate program, but to bring, the signage inside to include it as part of the interpretation. And then very quickly hired a consultant to help us think about how to weave this, important piece of our story into a site-wide narrative. But then the pandemic hit, and so everything kind of ground to a halt. We're looking forward to getting back to that work, once we're able to reopen and get our feet back under us. Like so many historic sites, financially, 2020 has just been devastating for us. But we're starting to turn a corner, definitely feeling optimistic about the year ahead. And we'd love to, really get back to a site-wide interpretive plan that, make sure that we're not telling these stories independent of one another, that, in this part of campus, you're just talking about Paul Revere. In this part, you're just talking about, cacao and the slave trade, that it's really a comprehensive and a cohesive story.
Right.
Nikki, we know that you're a big supporter of civic engagement and participation, and even touching on kind of what a rough year 2020 was on many historic sites and museums. What can people do to get involved with Old North Church and to help support it in a trajectory toward an even more educational and inclusive future?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Because we're virtual right now, it is a time when, people really all around the world can get involved. We do offer a digital speaker series and programming about on a monthly basis. So there's an opportunity to participate and to learn more through that program. We also have a really comprehensive website. We have a blog that has really over 200 posts on it. So there's a lot of history and information and content to engage with on our website. We have video, like a video blog. We have digital games. And so there's a lot to sift through there. And, I have to say, it's always a good time to donate. And so, if people are, really looking for ways to support us and to make sure that we are able to reopen, every gift counts. And so folks can donate on our website as well.
That is great. Thank you.
Yeah. And, we know your current plan is to open Old North in the spring, hopefully. So are you going to continue to offer a hybrid of both in-person and virtual programs?
Yeah, I do think so. We've just, we've had a lot of success with the virtual programs. And, honestly, while I think distancing will allow us to open tourism operations this year, it may still be some time before people want to come out for, an in-person lecture, when the option of doing it from home is still out there. It's also a great way for us to get new speakers, because if we're doing things virtually, we can have speakers Zoom in from anywhere. So I do think we'll continue to have a pretty healthy digital offering.
Right. And I guess my last question would be, what do you want visitors to take away from their experience with Old North? So once they hit those exit doors, what are some of the things you'd love for them to take with them?
Yeah. That's a question that we're really digging into right now with our strategic plan. And the first question that we're really wrestling with right now is just this fundamental question of whether our organization primarily exists to interpret and engage with the stories of the past, or do we exist to impact the future? And there's a lot to sift through there. And, maybe it's not one or the other. It's probably both, but, which one is the primary driver? And, through that, we think about, well, what are the basic things that we want people to take away when they leave? So we certainly want people to understand that we all have a responsibility to be involved in our communities and to be working to, create a more just and equitable society. We want people to understand that can look very different based on what your interests are, who you are, where you're at, how old are you, what do you have access to? And we want people to understand that there are barriers to active citizenship that some folks face and others don't. And so we want people to understand the complexity around that. But at the end of the day, we also want people to understand what happened here. We want people to understand, the facts and be able to separate the facts from the mythology of the Lantern Signal and Paul Revere's ride, to understand that it was a community effort that so many people beyond Paul Revere were involved in. And I think we want people to just feel, a sense of pride. I think patriotism is kind of a loaded term right now, unfortunately. But patriotism is very, very important to us. And I think, I could say that's one of our core values. So we want people to think about, hope and sacrifice and patriotism and what those things mean to them and what it could look like in their lives and their communities.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I wanted to thank you for joining us today, and keep up the good work, and make sure you tell Jake we said hello.
I will. Thank you.
Nikki, thank you again for joining us. Just as soon as Old North reopens, I am there. I cannot wait to get back to these sites. I've missed them so much over the past year. So I'm really, really looking forward to your reopening, and we'll be following that. So thank you again for joining us. And to our faithful listeners, we've been talking with Nikki Stewart, Executive Director of the Old North Church and Historic Site. We hope you've enjoyed another in a series of interviews from the Dr. Joseph Warren Historical Society. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, as we'll be continuing these discussions with various authors and experts. My name is Katie Turner-Getty, and on behalf of my colleague, Christian Despina, and myself, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikki.